Hello, my name is Jesse Peters. I am one of the instructional designers at Grantham University. I may or may not be working with you on the current course development that you've been hired to do at Grantham University, but you would be working with one of the instructional designers, and we wanted to set up a quick video to kind of explain the process that we go through and to show you the tool that you will have available to collaborate with us on collectively through the Blackboard system we use even with our students. So I'm actually going to start with how we develop courses here at Grantham, and by talking about the overall idea of backwards design when it comes to curriculum development. So first question that you always get is, what's backwards design? This isn't that hard. We're just, writing some tests and making some assignments and then put them into an online learning thing and kids will learn, right? Well, that's not exactly how learning is achieved. In fact, it's a very rigorous process and we take it very seriously. So backwards design, while it typically has 3 steps, we have a 4th step because there's review, approval, and revision if needed, but we'll focus on the 3 to begin with. And backwards design is what it says. We think with the end part, and we work backwards from there. So the idea is we are trying to figure out what we want students to learn, how we're going to show they learned it, and then how are we going to get them to learning that material, right? How are we going to get them to be successful on whatever assessments that we develop, right? So normally what happens is people develop classes where it's like, oh, I'm going to make these cool assignments, and then I'll write a test later on. Once we get to the end. But that's not really a very systematic way to go about designing a class. You should go in knowing what you want them to learn and then design things around those objectives and assessments. So we're going to talk about how we go and do that. So to start with, we just want to know what students need to know. What are the big ideas they want to come away with? What big questions do we want to ask them and have them research on that are open-ended and debatable? That produce a lot of argument and discussion. And then we go to the specific with objectives. We write very targeted objective statements that will say what specifically students need to know and be able to do. We try to focus on skills that can be transferred into the real world or the workplace. And a lot of times we try and aim for the higher level of Bloom's, which we'll talk about here in a minute. During this first phase, we also will decide what textbook we want to use and what publisher to go through and get you that to help also potentially develop some of those objectives as well. So we start with these objectives. We want to know what students want to learn, and to do that we use this taxonomy called Bloom's taxonomy. We have in the education world used this for a long time. It is the tried and true method of showing different tiers of learning from the very basic knowledge and comprehension all the way up to the synthesis and evaluation portion, where the cognitive processes are much higher and much more complicated. You can tell just by the verbiage in the light bulb here how that works. In the purple, we see that it says things like define, describe, name, outline, state, recall, right? These are all basic things, just remembering information that someone has told you. However, evaluation requires you to actually argue about something, right? To compare, to contrast, to judge and justify something, predict. So these things require evidence and a lot more of a thoughtful process. And so we try and write objectives that hit all these different levels throughout a course, and depending on how high the course is, it might be towards the top, and if it's a lower course, it might be more towards the knowledge, comprehension, application. But like I said, we'll get into that in more detail as you start to develop the course. So we start with these, we write objectives, and I'll give you examples of what this might look like. So 2 poorly worded objectives would actually be, student will understand the law of supply. Well, the problem with this, and a lot of people think that understand is a good verb to use, but it's not, because how are you going to measure it? I mean, there's lots of ways you could measure it, but we want to pick a very specific thing we want them to be able to do with that law of supply. Another example, student can complete questions about the Civil War. Well, what's interesting is that actually has nothing to do with knowledge. It's actually describing an activity. So we want to steer away from activity-based objectives, but we want to come to content-based objectives. So 2 good ones here of the same content, students will describe the law of supply in economics. So the student will actually have to describe what it is and how it works. All right, that'd probably be a written response of some kind, or maybe showing a graph in economics. Student will summarize the key issues that resulted in the start of the Civil War, right? So the student has to go from the beginning to the outbreak of the Civil War and trace the chronological order of events that got us to that moment, right? So they have to create something, write something that will do that. Those two things are measurable. We can put those on some type of assessment and know that they are getting that knowledge. So again, get into more detail with that as time goes on. So that's the first step. So after we have the objectives and everything figured out what we want students to know, then the question becomes, how do we prove that they learned that material or didn't learn that material? So this is where a couple different things come in. The two most critical ones at the top, formative checks. These are things that aren't incredibly impactful to a grade. They might be basic weekly assignments or discussion that kind of help the teacher know, are we on the right track? Is this student, did they pick up this specific content or maybe this specific objective during that week? And if not, we can go back and have a discussion with them. Tests and quizzes obviously are used to see if students objectively knew the material. This could be both as checkpoints, but also summative finals and midterms, that kind of thing. It could also be performance-based, where kids give speeches. It could be more in-depth discussions. And then project-based, right? There's lots of digital tools out there that students can use. They can create presentations like this. They can write essays. There are a wide variety of tools out there that can allow students to make projects, even in e-learning environments. It just depends on what the objective is and what you want them to show that they know that material. So once we have what we want them to know, how we're going to measure it, then we create the actual day-to-day and week-by-week activities that get students to the ability to show that knowledge acquisition. This could be things like this presentation, which is direct instruction towards the lower end of Bloom's knowledge and comprehension, so you're going over key facts or a lecture about a historical topic. Could be textbook reading, right? It could also be supplemental things like looking at other websites, YouTube videos. A lot of the textbook providers provide digital simulation software that students can use in specific content areas. There are a wide variety of things that you can have students do to learn the material and get towards knowing those objectives that we set forth in the beginning. And finally, the last part is once you've submitted everything to the instructional designer, we build the course, and then we submit it for review to the dean and the chairs in those colleges. They review it. They might ask for some revisions or have some clarifying questions. We'll come back to you and discuss. You might change some things, we may not. And after that, it's done. It's submitted out to the instructors to review for a little bit to get comfortable with it, and then it's off to the students. So during this whole time, though, right, I'm not just going to be like, okay, have fun, good luck. It is constant communication between the instructional designer like myself and you, at least on a weekly basis, to go over any issues, the timeline of due dates, things that are coming up for deliverables that you need to get to me, like objectives and quizzes and tests and discussion prompts, those kinds of things, and you're turning those in a timely fashion. And we'll use either phone or Google Hangouts. Google Hangouts is great because it will allow us to screen share so that we can troubleshoot any problems that we're having. Specifically, any problems that you might have with our Blackboard process called Workspace that we use with subject matter experts like yourself. It looks like this. You'll have a login and you'll go to our Blackboard server. You'll log in and you will be put into a class that looks exactly like this. What it does is allows you to walk through the curriculum design process step by step with me helping you throughout the process. So on the left-hand side over here where my mouse is the part that I want to make sure that you're fully aware of. It's the navigation portion. When you get to this first page, you can get some more information about backwards design, best practices, right? But I want to show you the syllabus. Syllabus is great as reference because it lets you know what each step involves and what you need to do in those steps, kind of as a very summarized and condensed version. So it's a great place to go to review that material. It also includes the curriculum manual, which goes into detail into the different parts of the process. I'm not going to go through this now. You can read it at your leisure, but it is a great resource to go through. And then on the left-hand side, there are the different steps to the design process. So for example, in step 1, this is where we are just in the beginning stages of the development. You are picking a textbook. You're learning about course leveling, how we ensure that if we write a 400 level college undergraduate class, that we are meeting the rigor, the rigor requirements for that development. We fill out this whole calculated table, and we ensure that we're doing that. So you pick a textbook, you tell me which one you want, I get you a copy of it. We also talk about, Bloom's taxonomy again in more detail and give you examples to see what that looks like. So again, right, different types of questions you can ask that fit the different levels. So we have lots of resources for you to use to help you in this process. It talks about writing the course objectives, right? So this is a neat document that gives you examples of good objectives and bad objectives and how to go about writing them. This talks about IRA mapping, which is about introducing, reinforcing, and assessing the different objectives and making sure we're doing that throughout the course, so we're not forgetting anything and leaving anything behind. So, for example, this is a template you'll get that will literally pick each objective, and we mark off that we're doing these things to reinforce and introduce and assess them. Finally, down here at the bottom, each step allows you to submit the deliverables each week or whenever a due date comes about. So this one is for submitting the objectives for the class. So you come in here once you've typed up the objectives in the description, and you will turn it in as a Word document, PDF, whatever you want, and you turn it in right to this assignment. I act as the teacher of this course, or the instructor, and I get whatever you submit. So it's just a neat portal for us to communicate with each other and to be able to send documents back and forth without having all the complications of random emails that get lost in the shuffle. It's just a nice way to keep everything organized. So I know this was kind of a quick overview of that, but the idea is it's a great place for us to communicate, and it should be an effective tool to get a course written in a timely fashion and in a well-done fashion as well. So we appreciate your time. Look forward to working with you here at Grantham, and have a wonderful day.